Do you know the one thing that makes fat loss impossible if you don't have it? In today's episode, we're diving into part 2 of my 7-part series on shedding belly fat, where we'll explore the importance of creating a caloric deficit. You'll learn what a caloric deficit really means, how to measure your intake and your expenditure, and how to determine the right deficit for you to get results. By the end of this episode, you'll have a clear plan to achieve fat loss through effective calorie management. Before we dive in, if you're listening on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button. And if you're watching on YouTube, then hit the like and subscribe button down below. Today, I'm really excited to dive into part 2 of the 7-part series on the Fat Loss Forever Pyramid. Again, to start off each of these episodes, I'm going to run through the 7 parts. I'm going to run through the pyramid, and then I'm going to dive into a specific level of the pyramid a lot deeper. To preface it, this pyramid is not something that I created myself. This was originally created by Dr. Eric Helms, and then I was made aware of it by a guy named Dr. Lane Norton. So this is the Fat Loss Forever Pyramid. Is not something that I created, but it's something that I want to dive into deeper with you so that you can achieve your health and fitness goals. And again, this is a pyramid that is really built when it comes to a fat loss goal, but it's also really important to know for any kind of health and fitness goal that you might have. So last episode, we talked all about the foundation of the pyramid, which is sustainability and adherence, because without that, nothing else matters. If you are not able to have a plan that you can adhere to sustainably and consistently, then nothing else matters. And that's what the pyramid means. With each step of the pyramid, the things they start off with the most important, and then it's not quite accurate to say they become less important, but it's like at the top, you can't do the top thing and expect results without any of the bottom stuff. You've got to do the bottom stuff first. It trumps anything that is above it. So let's run through the 7 steps, and then I'm going to dive into a caloric deficit. So step 1 that we covered last week is all about sustainability and adherence. The best scientific plan possible means absolutely nothing if you don't stick to it consistently. You have to find ways to leverage your ability to stay consistent. Step 2 is going to be about creating a caloric deficit, and that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how to create an energy expenditure that is greater than an energy intake, and we're going to talk about metabolism. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff during today's episode. The third level of the pyramid is exercise, how to appropriately leverage exercise to see the results that you want to see with body fat. We're going to talk about resistance training. We're going to talk about cardio. Then step number 4 of the pyramid is self-monitoring, how to track yourself appropriately, what to track, when to track, how to track in order to see the results that you want to see. Level number 5 is going to be protein and fiber. How do we leverage protein and fiber adequately in order to achieve our fat loss goals? Step number 6 is carbs and fats. These are our primary energy sources. How much of each do we want to have? Do we want to have one more than the other? How do we fill in the gaps with our calories after protein and fiber? And then 7th and finally, the top part of the pyramid is supplements. What supplements are helpful for fat loss? Which ones are not? Which ones are worth your while? Which ones are not? Are supplements needed for fat loss? And more. But today we're going to talk about the level number 2 of the pyramid, which is caloric deficit. Again, remember part 1. It needs to be sustainable, and you need to be able to adhere to it. Then the next thing that we absolutely need if we want to achieve the goal of fat loss is creating a calorie deficit. Because it doesn't matter what you do. If you don't create this deficit, you are not going to lose weight. Now, what this means is that you're creating an energy deficit, meaning you are expending more energy than you are intaking. And the way that we measure energy is through calories. It's simply a unit of measurement. So the next kind of question that you would ask is, how do we know if our expenditure is greater than our intake? Or how can we execute so that our expenditure is greater than our intake? So let's take each side of the coin, if you will, one at a time. We're going to start with the intake side of things. When it comes to intake, we want to think about our macronutrients. When it comes to proteins and carbs, for every 1 gram that you consume, that's 4 calories. When it comes to fat, it's for 1 gram, it's 9 calories. When it comes to fiber, it's 1 to 3 calories. When it comes to alcohol, it's 7 calories. Now, generally speaking, we think of maybe proteins, carbs, and fats as the main macronutrients, and the other ones are not quite as much, but that was just to give you a little bit a little bit of insight there. So think of this. Remember this if you don't remember anything else, at least from the intake side of things, that 1 gram of protein and carbs is 4 calories. 1 gram of fat is 9 calories. Now, that doesn't mean fat's bad. It just means fat is more energy dense than the other 2 macronutrients. And so when it comes to creating a caloric deficit, the only true way to knowing what your intake is to count your calories, is to count your macros. So for example, if you have 100 grams of protein, 100 grams of carbs, and 100 grams of fat in a particular day. Now, that is not a diet that I would recommend. I'm just trying to make it easy number-wise for you. 100 grams of protein is 400 calories. 100 grams of carbs is 400 calories. 100 grams of fat is 900 calories. That would be 400 plus 400 is 800 plus 900 is 1700. So that would add up to 1700 calories that you are consuming. So again, if you count your macros, if you count your calories, that'll give you a pretty darn good idea of what your intake actually is. And then we go to the other side of coin. What is your energy expenditure? How do we know if we're actually burning at 1700 calories? Are we burning less than 1700 calories? Or are we burning more than 1700 calories? So let's talk about it. When it comes to being able to track your expenditure, it's almost impossible to nail down exactly, because your energy expenditure is broken up into basically 4 different categories, and they all sum to what is called your total daily energy expenditure, or TDEE for short. The biggest part of your total daily energy expenditure is your BMR, your basal metabolic rate. That accounts for around 60% of the calories that you burn on a daily basis. And this is simply how many calories that you burn at rest. If you were laying down in your bed, eyes open, awake, that's how many calories are essentially your BMR. The next is your NEAT, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. This accounts for around 25% of your daily energy expenditure, or your daily calorie burn. And this is essentially all the things that you are doing unintentionally when it comes to movement. Maybe just fidgeting or talking with your hands, or just walking around your house, or walking to and from the grocery store. I also personally add in going on a intentional walk as part of your NEAT. Now, for a lot of people, that might be considered more of their exercise activity. It doesn't necessarily matter which bucket you put it in. I just think from a tracking standpoint, it's beneficial for me to think of going on walks as part of my NEAT. Again, that accounts for around 25% of your daily caloric burn. So 2 pretty big chunks right there, with it being 60% and around 25%. The third is your TEF, your thermic effective food. This accounts for around 10 to 15% of your daily caloric burn. Now, what this means is your body, when you eat food, has to expend energy in order to break down that food so that can assimilate it, digest it into its usable forms. And so it takes energy, it costs energy for your body to do that. And for your body to break down fat, it costs around 2 to 3% of the calories that you intake. For your body to break down carbs, it takes about 6 to 8% of the calories you intake. And then for breaking down protein and fiber, it accounts for around 20 to 30% of the calories you intake. Now, what do all these percentages mean? That means for that, however many, if you consume 100 calories of these foods, then those percentages almost don't get counted for the calories that you consume, because they get burned off. So for example, if you eat 100 calories of protein, then somewhere around 70 to 80% of those calories actually get consumed, if you will, because the other ones are burned. Another 20 to 30 calories are burned simply breaking down that food. So there is a net of 70 to 80 calories coming out of it. Then the fourth and final part of your total daily energy expenditure is your EAT, or your exercise activity thermogenesis, or your planned exercise that you do, your run, your lifting session, your bike, your swim, any of those things. That accounts for only 0 to 10% of your total daily caloric burn. And obviously that's just dependent on how much you exercise, but a lot of people overestimate how much their caloric burn during planned exercise sessions actually accounts for the total daily energy expenditure. Now, of course, if you're a professional athlete or you're someone who works out multiple times a day, this might be closer to 10%. But for a lot of us, it's going to be down into the single digits of energy expenditure. Now, knowing that those are the things that comprise or make up total daily energy expenditure, we want to find a way to determine what our maintenance calories are. Meaning, we want to figure out what our total daily energy expenditure is, because it's nice to know that BMR, NEAT, your thermic effective food, and your exercise activity are what make up your total daily calorie burn. But it's like, how do we know what that actual number looks like? So how do we determine what those maintenance calories are? How do we determine how much our body is actually burning on a daily basis? Well, two different ways, really. There are online calculators and some formulas that you can plug different things into and that you can use. Now, there's going to be varying levels of accuracy behind those things, but it can still give you a great baseline to work off of. Now, the second way, and really the only true way that you can nail it down more in a more refined way and really come to a closer number, is by actually tracking your calories and actually tracking your weight consistently over a period of 1, 2, or 3 weeks. Meaning that, let's say you eat 2,000 calories every single day for 3 weeks in a row, and you also weigh yourself every single morning for 3 weeks in a row, and nothing changes with your body weight. Now, there will be daily fluctuations, but let's say your average weight stays the same across those 3 weeks. That means that your maintenance calories is 2,000. That means you are both intaking 2,000 calories and your body is also burning 2,000 calories. Therefore, your body weight has stayed the same. But if you track your calories at 2,000 a day for 3 weeks in a row and you actually lose weight over that period of 3 weeks, that means that you were already in a calorie deficit. So your energy expenditure was actually greater than 2,000 calories. And then vice versa, let's say you eat 2,000 calories for 3 weeks in a row and you gained some weight. That means you were in a calorie surplus. That means you were eating 2,000 calories, but you weren't even burning 2,000 calories. So that is how to determine what your total daily energy expenditure is you can put some things into online calculators or formulas. I'm not going to dive into what's called the Mueller equation on this episode, but that's one particular formula that a lot of people use when it comes to determining what your energy expenditure is, or you can actually track your calories and your weight closely to get a better idea. Now, one thing before I move on to how big of a calorie deficit should you actually create if you want to lose body fat, I want to remind you that tracking both of these sides of the equation is very, very difficult. Counting how much you're intaking is so difficult because, first off, food labels can actually be off. Your measurements can be off. I mean, let's say you are putting 1 cup of broccoli into a meal. Well, sometimes you put in small pieces of broccoli and it actually fills up the entire cup. Sometimes you put in bigger pieces of broccoli and there's air kind of mixed in and maybe it's a little bit overflowing on the cup. And so it's hard to know exactly if your measurements are right. If you use a food scale, a digital food scale, and weigh the food, that can provide you with a little bit more accuracy. You can also forget to add things in when tracking your calories, and it can just be practically hard to manage your intake of calories, especially when you go out to dinner a decent amount, because you can't weigh your food and you don't know exactly what they're cooking it with, etc. So counting your calorie intake can be very difficult. And same thing on the other side of the equation is counting your expenditure can be very difficult because of various different reasons. But the wearable devices that tell you how many calories you burn in your workout, not very effective and not very accurate. So it's just really hard to nail these things down. But that doesn't mean tracking is worthless. Think about it like this. Just because it's hard to keep a budget doesn't mean you shouldn't keep a budget. Just because it's hard to figure out how much money's coming in, how much money's going out, and there's a little bit more this month than that month, and this week than that week, it doesn't mean that it's worthless. It just means that it's more difficult, and it still gives you a frame of mind to get an idea of where you're at. So even if tracking calories is hard and you might be a little bit off, it still gives you an idea of where you're at. Now, basically the last thing that I want to get into is about how much of a calorie deficit do we need to create in order to achieve the goal or see progress on the goal of body fat loss. Now, I would say a minimum of around 200 to 300 calories per week is the amount of, per day is the amount of calorie deficit that you would want to see. You would have an average of a 200 to 300 calorie deficit per day in order to achieve this calorie deficit. Or in order to achieve weight loss. Now, what does that actually mean? Let's say that you determine your maintenance calories. And let's say that your maintenance calories are that 2,000 calories per day. Okay. That means if you want to get to a 200 calorie deficit, that you need to consume around an average of 1,800 calories a day. 2,000 minus 200 is 1,800. So you need to achieve an average of 1,800 calories per day. The next step is to calculate what your weekly calorie budget is, because it's not necessarily super important that you're just successful one day, right? Consistency. We need to be successful over the week. So our weekly calorie budget would be that 1,800 times 7 days, and you would get 12,600. Now, it's less important for you to memorize the numbers that I'm saying because I'm just giving you an example and know how you would apply this for yourself and understand it. So you take your maintenance calories once you've determined that. You subtract the amount of calorie deficit you want to be in. So we subtracted 200 to get to 1,800 per day. Then we multiply it by 7 days a week, and we got the calorie budget per week of 12,600. So we can put those 12,600 calories across the days however we want. We can do it 1,800 calories all 7 days of the week. Or a lot of people might like to, I might splurge a little bit on the weekends, or I might be a little bit less stringent on the weekends. And so let's say somebody decided to do that. So they might consume 2,200 calories on the weekend. So if you do 2,200 calories on both Saturday and Sunday, let's say, then that comes up to 4,400 calories. So you come up with a number of calories that you consume on those 2 days. Then you would subtract that number from your overall weekly calorie budget. So you would take that 12,600, subtract 4,400, and it would give us 8,200. And so we have 8,200 calories to work with across the other 5 days of the week. For simplicity standpoint, let's say we just eat the same number of calories on all 5 of those days. We would do that 8,200 divided by 5, and we would get 1,640. So your goal, in order to achieve an average daily calorie deficit of 200 calories per day, would be to, during Monday through Friday, have 1,640 calories, and then on Saturday and Sunday to have 2,200 calories. Now, that was just an example of how to break up your weekly calorie budget, if you will. You can do it in however way would be most effective and most sustainable for you, but that was just one particular way. And then what would be your goal with this? Your goal when creating a calorie deficit is to lose anywhere from 0.5 to 2 pounds of weight loss per week. Now, that is on average. Weight loss is not a linear game, just like the stock market is not a linear game. When you zoom out, you want to see a little bit of a straighter line. When you zoom in, there's some bumps in the road. And so that's why when you weigh yourself, you want to weigh yourself every single day and then take a weekly average. We're going to get more into that when it comes to self-monitoring, but think about setting your expectations appropriately. We talked a little bit about that during the last episode of 0.5 to 2 pounds of weight loss per week on average. And it might be closer to 2 pounds only if you are more overweight. It's going to be down closer to 0.5 pounds if you already are relatively lean. Last thing that I want to say, I told you that you want to think about at least a 200 to 300 calorie deficit on a daily basis. That's important because you should be aiming to create as small of a calorie deficit as possible that provides you with results. You don't want to jump to this huge calorie deficit too quickly, or you're going to damage your metabolism in ways that you are going to hurt your progress moving forward in the future. So the idea is create the smallest calorie deficit possible that provides you with results. Now, a lot of people who are listening to this episode, maybe this is the first time you've heard this stuff. Maybe you've heard this stuff before. I know it might be a lot. Feel free to re-listen. Feel free to rewatch. Feel free to take notes. Feel free to send me questions on Instagram. DM me at carrier_bestyou. But this does not mean calories are all that matters. I am not the type of person who thinks like, just hit your calories and you're good. Absolutely not. It's, yes, calories in, calories out is the first thing that needs to be hit when it comes to nutrition perspective. It's the first thing that needs to be hit to make fat loss possible. But then we're going to get into protein and fiber. We're going to talk about carbs and fats. We're going to talk about the right sources of calories a little bit later on. But know that you have to have energy expenditure greater than energy intake. Know that tracking those things are both very difficult, but tracking your macros and tracking your calories is possible to get an idea of where you stand. And then with energy expenditure, you can estimate those things with some online calculators. You can really track your calories and your weight closely over an extended period of time to get an idea of where your maintenance is. And then you can do a little bit of math outside of that to create a small calorie deficit of a 200 to 300 calorie deficit per day to start seeing those results of about 0.5 to 2 pounds of weight loss on average per week. I hope today helps you. I hope you share this episode with a friend or family member who maybe has body fat loss goals or is just a health and fitness enthusiast. Share it with them. If you're listening on the Apple Podcast app or on Spotify, make sure you hit the follow button and subscribe to this episode. This is only part 2 of the 7-part series on the Fat Loss Forever Pyramid and how to have a guide to achieving body fat loss. So make sure you follow. If you're watching on YouTube, make sure you hit the like and subscribe button. More than anything, I hope this episode gets you smarter. I hope it allows you to get closer to your health and fitness goals. And ultimately, I hope it allows you to get closer and closer to your best you.